So after some extensive designing, I found a really good shape for the body of the crossbow, and I've pretty much planned out everything else. You can copy down this design as long as you have graph paper, where for every 4 squares it equals 1 inch. Just keep in mind that throughout this build, a lot of the mechanisms are subject to change, and that means that a lot of the measurements might change as well. So let's start off by cutting out this design. So I don't actually know what type of wood this is, but I know that it's soft because after I've cut it, you can see that it's quite porous. You ideally want a nice softwood and not a hardwood because hardwoods will crack and softwoods won't, and they're much easier to work with. Although hardwoods look much better, you can test your luck with that. I've already tried this and I ended up in failure because the wood cracked. So now that most of the aluminum plates have been cut out, I now need to screw them in. So I'm going to be taking a countersink and countersinking these holes. What countersinking does is basically it just makes this hole larger so that you can then take your screw, and then when you screw it in, it's going to become flush with this surface. You could alternatively just use a larger drill bit than what you drilled the hole with, but in this case, since I have a countersink, I'm just going to use that. So now that I drilled all the holes and I've countersunk and put in the screws, it's now time to move on to the trigger. I'm going to be cutting the trigger mechanism out of some spring steel, and this isn't because of the spring steel's properties, it's because the spring steel is just the right thickness. So what I'm going to try and do to enlarge this gap a little more is I'm just going to be taking my blowtorch, and then I'm just going to be heating up the bottom of the trigger with it and pressing it in. And hopefully the red hot seal will be able to burn its way through and get a perfect fit. So now that's actually worked quite well, and as you can see, the trigger is poking through the whole entire thing. And now what I need to do is just enlarging the gap right here, and enlarging the gap right here so that the trigger can move freely. So now I'll explain to you how the trigger works. So this trigger mechanism works by basically just the string sits in this notch right here, and since the string is pulling parallel to the pivot point right here, you can't move the trigger down forward. Right now I'm pulling on it and it's not moving at all. So what the trigger is going to try and do is basically just fall until it reaches parallel to the pivot point. So with that being said, you want to make sure that when you drill your hole, it's being parallel to where the notch is. And since you have a lot of leverage down here, I'm pulling on it really hard, and when you pull the trigger, it releases the string. And for the trigger, since I made the gap just slightly too large, what I've done is I've just put in some washers here to reduce the wobble. Now it's really solid. This is the end of part 1 because this video is getting quite long, and be sure to subscribe because next week I'll be uploading part 2.